You are listening to Down Home. The news is everywhere. An oppressive authoritarian regime has attacked a neighboring country. The world is on high alert. Nations take sides, economic blockades were levied, but it doesn't work. The world descends into deeper war. No, I'm not talking about 2022 and what's happening in Ukraine. This is 1914, the Great War, World War I. Black Canadians felt the same urge to serve and protect their country as most did that enlisted and were shipped overseas. But for the longest time, they were told they couldn't stand shoulder to shoulder with white men. By 1916, there was an urgent need for Canadian recruits. So segregated units were created. The Black Battalion was created. The urge to serve was strong among a number of Black Nova Scotians. More than 500 enlisted, including a young Sidney Jones. I knew him as Deacon Jones, as did anyone who attended Cornwall Street Baptist Church in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s. To Jay, he was simply Granddad. In this episode, Jay and I discuss his family's significant role in the Black Battalion. I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience from two Black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah.
Well, the story of the Jones actually starts with the three Samuels. Samuel Jones 1, Samuel Jones 2, and Samuel Jones 3 Jr. As far as we know, our Jones family history in Canada began with the arrival of Samuel Jones from Kentucky in the USA, where he was born into slavery. He may have come as a free man, granted manumission by his slave owners, or he might have escaped slavery via the Underground Railway. He resided in different periods in Dartmouth, Cherrybrook, Preston, and Fall River. He might be the Samuel Jones listed in the Book of Negroes, the American version. His wife, Betsy, unknown maiden name, was born in Canada. Samuel Jones II, Sr. Samuel Jones was born in Preston in 1820. His first wife, Martha Reed, was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1822. They had 10 children. His second wife was Margaret Elms Paris, who was born in Tracadie, Nova Scotia in 1845. Hattie Mae Jones was the only child of Samuel and Margaret. Sidney Morgan Jones was Hattie Mae's son. Samuel Jones III was one of Samuel and Martha Reed's 10 children. He was born in Truro, Nova Scotia in 1854. So that's the story of the three Joneses, just sort of, you know, and they all had children afterwards, you know, and they all named them Samuel.
Yeah, that was a interesting trend for that generation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, because that was with the Wises as well. Like there were John Wises in there was like three generations of John, and the firstborn was named John, which is really strange if you ask me. And I think my father, even when I was born, they were because my father wasn't firstborn, so he wasn't named after his father. But because I was the firstborn son, everyone gave him shit because I wasn't Bruce.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
so I wasn't named after him, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty weird. I wonder if that was like just like a North America, like a sort of implemented kind of British tradition, you know, with their names, and maybe with, you know, as families, they just sort of did this sort of same thing, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. Yeah, so that's the three Joneses. So as far as the blacks go in the military, specifically the Black Battalion, there was a call for volunteers in 1916, which allowed for individuals, black men, to enlist in local regiments in their towns if they would be accepted. Despite the previous rejections and the segregation at the times, many black men throughout the country volunteered for duty, and Nova Scotia provided a large number of the recruits. Of the 300 who volunteered, 200 were not eligible due to the fact that they were employed by the coal mines. So many of the men at that time, they started to get bitter because they were wondering why they weren't allowed to join. They were all healthy, they were fit, but they kept being rejected. And all they wanted to do was really to fight for the country. But the fact of the matter is that in the military at the time, allowing blacks to join was still kind of faux pas. Like blacks were still looked at as third-class citizens. And a lot of the officers actually didn't want the blacks to sort of come in almost like a strength in numbers, because they didn't, in their mind, they didn't want them to gain some sort of foothold into the country. It's really, this just was some of the thoughts among people in some of the source material that I looked at. One, which was the Black Battalion book written by Kelvin Ruck, specifically about the Black Battalion. And I wanted to read something that specifically talked about the rejection of the black volunteers in that particular time. For more than a century, Black Canadians have unquestionably demonstrated their loyalty by volunteering for military service. In August 1914, however, when World War I erupted, Black Canadians were treated like third-class citizens. The message that they would not be included in the patriotic and military institutions of Canada came across loud and clear. Throughout the country, from Nova Scotia to British Columbia, large numbers of black volunteers were being rejected strictly on the basis of race and color. Officials at some recruiting stations bluntly told black volunteers that it was a white man's war. In other instances, they said more tactfully, "We will call you when we need you." And in Western Nova Scotia, blacks often heard, "We don't want a checkerboard army." Black people in a number of provinces viewed military service in wartime not only as a right, but a responsibility. They were not prepared to accept a meek policy, official or unofficial, that rejected them on racial grounds. A struggle for basic human rights was beginning to take shape. So
yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Like the drive to otherize people of color was a lot stronger than the push for military service.
Yeah.
Isn't that something, man?
Yeah, it's very sad, looking at this stuff, you're just like, damn, like, for wanting to do the right thing, there was so much until the point where they needed them. So they had no choice.
Yeah. Aquila did a project about World War I. That's where Canada basically showed its teeth to become a nation, was in World War I. And their losses early on in the war were huge. So that probably went into the fact that they actually allowed Black Canadians to go into the military service, because they're basically running out of young white men to send overseas, huh?
Yeah. And even the Americans actually got involved. Like there was like some sort of immigration agreement that would allow blacks to come across and even join. But yet again, the segregation and, the concern of officers, that always put it in balance, until certain people kept pushing for it because they felt, the blacks could be utilized in the fight.
Yeah.
So anyway, on March 17th, 1917, Canada's first Black Battalion was authorized in Truro, Nova Scotia, but not all the blacks served in the number 2 construction battalion. There were also black volunteers who served in different combat units, one being the 106th Battalion, the Nova Scotia Rifles, which was authorized on November 8th, 1915. Various recruits from Nova Scotia came to enlist, and because of this, many white men who were about to enlist refused to do so. Some of the officials believe the service of black men could be utilized for the cause despite reservations. So 16 black men were accepted into the battalion. One was my great-grandfather, Sidney Morgan Jones. And here's what he said at the time. The realization that 16 blacks were in the battalion was an exciting development. That the fact that I, a 15-year-old boy, was one of them gave me an intense feeling of pride. And like many people back then, Sidney had changed his age to join the battalion. Um, so he lied about his age to meet the legal requirement. Of course, not records weren't always
Mm-hmm.
easily found. So, and
Mm-hmm.
they needed people. So I'm sure they were just going, you know what?
Yeah.
And not only for Sidney Jones, he had other family in the same battalion,
Yeah.
which was Jeremiah Jones, who was 58 years old. He
Right.
lied about his age, saying that he was 38 because he looked 20 years younger than his
Yeah.
age,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he was remarkable physical shape. And many years after his death, he got the Distinguished Conduct Medal for bravery.
Yeah.
He's also single-handedly well known for taking out a German machine gun, capturing both the enemy and the machine gun, making them carry it back to to his commanding officer
Yeah.
and lay it at their feet.
Yeah.
So years later, he got awarded that medal after first being rejected because of race.
It's
So,
crazy,
you know,
man. Crazy.
so Sydney, also it was just the spirit of the times for people to
Yeah.
want to fight, and it meant it was a huge thing to them.
Yeah. Like it's well, think about it, man. Like the First World War, the whole world was involved, and of course the Americans came in late, as they always do, but Canada was right on the forefront because of their connection to Britain. They were there from the beginning,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah.
So yeah, like we haven't seen times like that at all since the Second World War, basically.
Hmm.
So the motivations to say, hey, I want to be a part of this. Personally, I can't understand it really.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're a different generation. But think about it back then. You want your pride in your country
Yeah.
and wanting to serve, and then being told you can't serve because of your race, and then being accepted in eventually. That probably was a huge thing. I bet.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because there's another quote that my grandfather said. He said it looked like the thing to do to be a soldier, and I sort of got caught up in the spirit of the times. So right then and there, and he didn't really he lived and we'll get to that, but race was still a factor then. And even as the 106th Battalion arrived overseas, they were seen as servants for the most part, doing a lot of the labor around the camp. They couldn't wash and they couldn't eat until after the white soldiers had done so. And
Yeah.
these were actually stories that my grandfather, because I asked him what it was like,
Mm.
and he would tell me these are some first account sort of things but he just said to me, I remember at the time, he said it was just a sense of pride.
Hmm.
And so he decided to keep his head down and just do what he was told,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's wow, man. Like and just to think about the danger you're going into too, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And, but how my grandfather got there, I guess, his road to Passchendaele began as a teenager in Truro, Nova Scotia. Truro is a railroad hub town not far from the city of Halifax. In these days in that town, all the kids would hang out at the station watching trains go by. And Sydney was inspired by the troops that were passing through to go into Halifax, whether to enlist or just to go into Halifax as a port city to be shipped out overseas. And so he enlisted and he got in. And then 40 days later, after being in uniform, he got sent overseas. And being a young 15, 16-year-old, whatever he was at the time, and race being a huge issue, he had an old kind of soul mentality of thinking, I guess, when he was over there. These are some of the stories he told me, that the revelations that he had, he started to watch when he was fighting in battle. He said, we were crawling over, white bodies and black bodies. And he goes, I realized at that time it didn't really matter. There was something bigger that he was fighting for.
Yeah.
And, at that age, for him to discern that, I think he knew what the cause was, and it wasn't about being black or white. Even despite they were made to think they were inferior, he was like, the pride for him was like, you know what, I'm fighting. I'm fighting for my country, for what it stands for.
Yeah.
And I think those times are something that we'll probably never ever experience. As I look back on his life and some of the things that I was lucky to hear from him, it really sort of makes up the man that he was.
Now, I know your grandfather as Deacon Jones from
Yeah.
Cornwall Street Baptist Church. Did he ever talk to you about how religion played a part in his experience back in the day, or his beliefs played an experience back? Because I know he talked about his beliefs and his religion about later on in life, but way back in that experience when he was 15, did he relate any of that to his beliefs?
I think there was a moment where it definitely came into play. And I'm just speaking through him, but honestly, he was he fought in Passchendaele.
Yeah.
And he was wounded, and he got shot, and the bullet went above his just above his elbow, and it shattered his arm.
Right.
And he felt, and he laid there for a while, injured and wounded as the battle went on, just basically fighting to survive, like even playing dead, and just laying there. And I remember him saying that there was a certain faith in that he had, that he was going to be all right. Now, I think that came from a spiritual way, because I think after he came back, he was wounded and his arm needed a lot of attention. He was in Truro at the time, so he was going back and forth into the Camp Hill Hospital to get his arm looked at. And I think at the time he veered off into not so pleasurable paths that kind of took him off, and I don't think it was until later that he sort of found God. I believe it was after he was in the 40s, after he had tuberculosis, he started to pray in a religious way to God. And, it wasn't long after that, in his eyes, that he was able to walk out of a sanatorium, which his wife, Amelia Jones, did not.
Yeah.
She succumbed to tuberculosis, but he did. And from that moment on, I think he started to get more involved in giving back to the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think faith came to play, later on in life. But I also believe he had faith even there on the battlefield when he needed to, I don't know about religion as a construct, but I do believe in maybe having hope and faith in an outcome that is good, So he was wounded in Passchendaele, which was one of the third battle of Ypres, I believe it was called. And it was the bloodiest kind of engagement. So for him to survive that, he came back and sort of tried to put, I guess, his life back together there, which quickly came together quite fast. He became a community leader. He became a Royal Canadian official. He became a barbershop operator. He went on to become a deacon at Cornwall Street Baptist Church. And also he was the manager of the Senior Citizens Center that they had. That was which was in the structure of the church, I guess, was just an extension of his duties as a deacon. And he had, as with your grandmother, Edith Chandler, they had prayer meetings and different things. And so faith, became very important. And I think it was just always important. I think something called him. I think he knew what he had to do. And I think, faith pertains to life in that sort of way too, that you're on the right track. Despite what, you're going to find along the way.
In your conversations with him and later on in life, did he talk about the importance of that time in his life? How it structured him as a man when he came back from World War I? You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny. My grandfather was a quiet man, very strong, very stoic,
Yeah.
kept things close to the chest. The only thing I can remember, I think he was affected by it if I could look back in hindsight.
Mm.
And at the time, I mean, he was 73 when I was born.
Yeah.
So, we had a pretty cool relationship in those young years. I mean, but it was more about funniness and everything like that. But otherwise, what I observed, he was just very quiet, and his presence is what I was in awe of. He was just a man who sat back and observed, and he didn't really talk about that stuff much until later on in life, when it was just him and I, when he started to sort of open up and talk about his vulnerable things in life. That's when we really started to become close. And that's when he told me those things, in the sense of, he didn't tell me, I think he wanted me to see how I was supposed to be going forward, so I observed him. I can remember being in the hospital when I was 5 years old, and he would often come visit me. Sometimes I'd wake up and he'd be there, and we'd have a conversation. I was 5. I spent the year in the hospital, but we would always talk about different things. He'd ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and then years later, say 16 years later, it was me talking to him in the hospital. We spent the last 2 years in the hospital, and I think that's where he started to open up. But I just watched in awe growing up, because he just contained to his business of being involved in what he was involved in, and didn't really let out too much emotion. He was just very thoroughbred. There was just something about him, and whatever it was that may have bothered him throughout his life, he was able to carry and just live with and accept. I think some circumstances that shaped him as a man, where he didn't really have a close relationship with his mother. He didn't know his father, so I think he learned by example, and maybe fighting in World War One and coming back and having a family of 11 kids, and then watching the love of your life pass away. I think all of that just made him want to take care, but he took care at a distance.
I wonder how close he was with his brother that he went off to war with, man.
They were half brothers. I don't know if they were super close. That's some history that I've yet to discover. But especially the age difference.
No, literally old enough to be his almost father, definitely. Almost grandfather.
There was 43 years age difference.
Now, did they enlist at the same time? They were half brothers, right?
Yeah, they did, I guess.
At the very same time.
Yeah, in the 106th Battalion, I guess that area was looking for people. And that's when my grandfather quit school in grade 8.
Wow.
Hopped on the train and went into Halifax and enlisted and got in. So
there's a movie there somewhere, man.
Well, there was a documentary that I can't seem to find. I saw a clip of it one time a few years back on YouTube, but I can't seem to find it. I was looking for it, but it is a movie. Kind of, there's a story to be told there.
Definitely, man.
And the thing, like I said, I think he evolved into giving back to the community. He had a barbershop in the Camp Hill Hospital, which was also a veterans hospital. So being involved, he started to give free haircuts to all the veterans that were staying there, that were, healing, like even in the Second World War, which he did serve in as well, just as an officer, sort of watching the docks and the Halifax dockyard. He was like a special constable. So that was kind of his involvement, but he didn't serve in battle. But just because he was involved in the Canadian Legion, some of the veterans from the First World War stepped up again to offer their services, but not, of course they were old, but just as
they're older, man,
diplomats kind of thing. But given that that privilege, I guess.
And I didn't know too much about the Black Battalion at all. So you've given me some information there today. I knew that they existed. I knew the time frame, but that was it.
Mhm.
I didn't know much about the Black Battalion at all, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew, and I didn't know that your grandfather fought at Passchendaele. That Passchendaele is a turning point for Canada as a nation.
Yeah. And which helped them win the war, arguably.
Yeah.
You know?
Passchendaele was a reason why, when Germany finally sat down at the peace talks table, Canada had a seat at those tables. I don't think they had much influence, but a big portion of the reason why they had a seat at the table was Passchendaele. So, you know, your grandfather in that battalion had a role to play in Canada becoming a nation in and of itself, and not being, beholden to the Brits any longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big thing, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in some of the research that I did, and even some of the conversations we had later on in life, it was a huge thing of pride for him, and he always felt lucky, even after being injured, to survive it. And, he, and I'm honored to even know that that's where, he sort of became a man, and he was able to just sort of acclimate into the community and take that warrior spirit and still give it to the next generations. I really feel fortunate. And even years later, as I'm, almost turning 50 years old, he truly was my mentor, and the lessons that I'm learning from investigating his life and our sort of family tree, I'm starting to see some things that I never quite saw before, even when I had the opportunity. So
Yeah.
to be able to look back at our elders and, gain strength and knowing what they went through is very important to be able to discover and at least tell some of that story in the way that I can,
Yeah, definitely, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spark magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trails start to blaze. It's a fire inside.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
Boy, just kicking it live. A connection so strong, transcribed with the vibe like magic prescribed. Only to see the perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time.
This is a love manifesto. It was a bit of a quest though, going back in time to a time of retro, active in the attic, mind acrobatics, flipping out, tucking in, beginning again, what I need to win, forever to the end, a perfect blend of that something that will mend a broken-hearted, blackened garden. Still in bloom from the shadows of the cave, mastering self so I am no longer called a slave. Thoughts of Rumi, a love for lust, an invisible child on the cusp, sipping from a cup that has now runneth over, seeping into roots deep until he learned how to get over understanding. Sometimes I get dizzy, it's a song for the horn, a melody for truth in tune with the dawn of an early morn. That's when I rise to seize the day,
finding hope and strength in the memory of those that paved the way, walking through storms of origins unknown so that flowers would bloom one day in the month of May. Mother, may I please pledge allegiance to them, a rose from concrete, black on both sides, most deaf in fields of endless days, swallowing pride as freedom floated by in the bluest of the sky. They ran in the night so they couldn't be seen, through the underground toward a tunnel of light to still have a dream. Kings and queens free from shadows and valleys of death. If we take a knee, does that mean we have to take our last breath? It's 8:46, there's a pain in my neck. There are so many secrets still untold, unburied deep beneath, within the depths of residential school steps. Excuse me, mister, we're already so close to the edge. We've conformed to the norm, but our lives don't seem to matter. Can't you hear the power of people who just want to know purpose and privilege, and maybe one day touch the rung of the ladder and not be lynched and hung? We are victims of this system, a legacy built from our own labor, food for thought taught, put on a plate, savoring hate as the flavor. We all gotta eat, but we just seem to taste the same behavior. Let's scrape it all clean, make way for a new canvas. By doing better, we can still have a dream, painting a new picture, something sore eyes have never seen. You know what I mean? Because I know what I mean. It has been tough for us to still be in segregation, stuck in isolation, locked down for over 400 years of mass incarceration, trauma passed down to each generation. I guess we just gotta hold on strong, wading in waters, singing our secrets within Negro spirituals, standing up for our civil rights not to feel wrong. A call to arms free from chains of sorrow. We can't let yesterday still become our tomorrow. So I throw my hands in the air so there's no shot of force from a blast for this colored outcast. I just have to ask, are we still a threat now that we all have to wear the same mask?